First of all, for those asking, I am aware of the whole Kojima abandoned blue box conspiracy. I'm going to try to compile information on that and make a video potentially down the line. But for this video, I want to talk about Electronic Arts. Many of you may recall that prior to E3, I reported on EA having faced a hack that resulted in a bunch of data getting stolen. Here's a report from Bleeping Computer published on June 10th, 2021. The hackers stole this data and are trying to sell for $28 million, which is just an insane amount, and I don't know if anyone would be willing to pay for that. But among the things stolen include debug tools, SDK and API keys, FIFA 21 matchmaking server, FIFA 22 API keys and some SDK and debugging tools, Frostbite source code and debug tools. Source code getting stolen can be especially harmful. Many proprietary EA games framework and SDKs, Xbox and Sony private SDK and API key, and Xbox, PlayStation, and EA, PFX and CRT with key currently used. So that's what's listed here, and EA has responded. They spoke to news outlet Vice and said that they're investigating, no player data was accessed, and insisted that this is not going to affect players, the games, and their business, trying to play down the damage of this hack. And I don't know how trustworthy this statement is, if it's true that it really wasn't a big deal, or if it's had more of an adverse effect than they're letting on. They haven't said anything about whether employees have been affected, if personal information has been leaked. Now, you would think that given that this is a multi-billion-dollar company, the process of hacking EA, breaching them, and then stealing all this data was a complicated matter, and that it required a lot of work and effort. But as it turns out, this hack was a lot easier than you might think. The methods that the hackers used to breach, essentially EA let them in a lot of ways. And this was detailed by news outlet Vice, who actually spoke to some of the hackers who engaged with this nefarious activity, and they detailed exactly how they went about it. And so let's actually take a look at this. It's a very curious story, and it also raises security concerns about EA, and I hope they will take steps to mitigate this, because we're talking about potential breaches of work by employees, personal information of employees, and potentially, if breaches are bad enough, player information as well. So, a representative for the hackers told Motherboard in an online chat that the process started by purchasing stolen cookies being sold online for $10 and using those to gain access to a Slack channel used by EA. For those who don't know what cookies are, here is Slashgear, who also reported on this and explained in basic terms, cookies are one of the most commonplace convenience features of the internet and web services, responsible for saving login data in sessions. With them, you can avoid having to enter your authentication credentials every time you visit the same webpage, for instance, and they can also be used to record a log of visits. However, what few may realize is that there's also a marketplace for stolen cookies online, sold for nefarious purposes. So cookies essentially offer certain conveniences while you're web browsing by storing certain data. And obviously that's a bit of a double-edged sword, because if that data is stolen, it could potentially be used to engage in hacks. And with EA in particular, that stolen data, the stolen cookies, were used to gain access to the Slack server for EA employees. Vice also details here that cookies can save the login details of particular users and potentially let hackers log into services as that person. In this case, the hackers were able to gain access to EA Slack using the stolen code. Vice also brought up an incident that isn't directly linked to this specific hack, but there are details of how back in February 2020, Motherboard reported that a group of researchers discovered an ex-engineer had left a list of the names of EA Slack channels in a public-facing code repository. This lapse in security didn't directly affect this specific instance, but it is a report of a recent case where EA's security was just far too loose and could have been potentially compromising, and in the case of this specific instance, it certainly did quite a bit of damage. So once the hackers infiltrated EA Slack channel, it was just a matter of essentially putting in requests that would allow them to further their hack under the guise of being someone relevant at EA. So here we have a quote from a representative from the hackers who said the following: "Once inside the chat, we messaged an IT support member. We explained to them we lost our phone at a party last night. EA's IT support bought the story, and the hackers, under this disguise, requested a multi-factor authentication token that would grant them access to EA's corporate network. The representative said this was successful not once, but 2 times. So they infiltrated Slack. They basically went, yes, hi IT support, this is Howard Ackerman of EA. We would like access to stuff because we left our phone at a party last night. And they said, yeah, seems legit, and just walked them into the network. Once inside EA's network, the hackers found a service for EA developers for compiling games. They successfully logged in and created a virtual machine, giving them more visibility into the network, and then accessed one more service and downloaded game source code. Let me remind you again, 780 gigabytes, almost a terabyte worth of data that was taken directly from EA servers. Motherboard reached out to Electronic Arts, and interestingly enough, a spokesperson basically confirmed the account of this hacker representative, said straight up this is exactly how things played out. EA then confirmed to Motherboard the contours of the description of the breach given by the hackers. And further lending credence to this whole situation is that the hackers actually gave Motherboard evidence, provided a series of documents they say were stolen as part of the hack, including an assortment of materials on PlayStation VR, how EA creates digital crowds in the FIFA games, and documents about AI in games, alongside source code of Frostbite, which I'm genuinely wondering how damaging that is. Having access to source code means you can study it and know exactly how this software machine works, which allows you to circumvent security measures, and that could be very damaging for games that utilize Frostbite. Now, I'm not an expert in software engineering or anything like that. I'm not a programmer, so I couldn't tell you exact details as to how damaging this ultimately is and whether EA can be believed when they say that the stealing of Frostbite source code and whatnot ultimately won't be affecting their games and their business, but I'd hardly think it was nothing. As a cybersecurity expert explained, speaking to CNN, source code could theoretically be copied by other developers or used to create hacks for games. And then a separate spokesperson from a different security firm said anytime source code gets leaked, it's not good. Hackers can comb through the code, identify deeper flaws for exploit, and sell that previous code on the dark web to malicious threat actors. So yeah, this is definitely not nothing, and what is surprising to me is just how easy it was for hackers to actually breach EA. I mean, basically $10 cookies that essentially opened the floodgates for these hackers to go in and steal this data. It was so much simpler than I thought it was going to be, and this again raises security concerns. Cybersecurity won't always be perfect, but the hackers in this case barely had a try, and beyond this compromising the work of employees and the personal information of employees, me as a customer am less prone to trusting Electronic Arts if security is ultimately this lax. What if one day, hackers manage to infiltrate deep enough where player data is leaked? And now with this source code, is there a way for hackers to work their way back and skim through the code and find ways to nefariously affect other players, be it their gameplay experience or directly affect their computing systems? And EA says everything's a-okay, but EA has not necessarily been the most trustworthy of companies in the last few years. It's hard to just take their word for it. Now, I will repeat what I said in my previous coverage of this story. I do not condone any of this. This is a crime, and yes, it's easy to point and laugh at EA, but hacks like these also result in innocents getting caught in the crossfire. I certainly don't feel bad for EA executives because as far as I'm concerned, they engage criminally with how they avoid taxes, with how they sell gambling to kids, with how they try to avoid legal scrutiny, and how they keep navigating around issues that customers and government officials keep bringing up to them. They are not good people as far as I'm concerned. I don't feel bad for them at all. But as far as the ground floor employees go and the people who put all this work into these projects, all the software, and the potential for, employees being directly affected by this, all that stuff is where my focus is at, and I hope that stuff is minimal ultimately. But because of the reputation that EA has built for itself, namely due to EA's executive mandates and leadership's mismanagement of things, people generally just aren't feeling sympathetic towards EA as a whole, as a company, which, to a degree I understand, but at the same time it's important to acknowledge that, this is ultimately not a good thing, and it's not a trend we should encourage, because they might do it to not just companies that we aren't fans of, but other companies that maybe have good intentions, but may potentially open themselves up to having their data stolen. But with all said and done, I thought this was an update worth breaking to you guys to follow up on the previous story that I did. Many of you, many gamers out there, play EA games, old, recent, and upcoming, and the lapse in security on EA's part at the very least is worth highlighting to keep people on their toes, though I hope EA really starts taking security a lot more seriously and doesn't let very simple hacks like this happen to a degree that in the future, or maybe even in the present, it might severely affect employees and players alike, and the games as well, and the work that was put into building these engines and securing them and all that stuff. But until we learn more about this, in the meantime, let me know in the comments below what your take is on all of this, and if you have any technical knowledge that you can offer as far as how this kind of hack could potentially affect games, employees, and players. Feel free to share those insights in the comments below. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.